Hello and welcome back to Bookish Theories. In today's video, we'd like to talk about ENHYPEN's upcoming comeback, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of the clues that can be found in the concept photos and teasers. Now, if back in the Border series we saw ENHYPEN's journey across the border of a new world, Dimension Dilemma is an album that will continue to explore the conflicting and confusing feelings that were first introduced back in Carnival. Back in that album, the boys experienced the new reality of their debut as a carnival where everything was flipped upside down and dream and reality were mixed together, and in Dimension Dilemma, this concept is further developed with a story that focuses on the dilemmas that arise in the light of this transition. As anticipated in the press release, Dilemma is an album that will portray ENHYPEN's entrance in a new dimension that is much more strange and contradictory than they previously expected. According to the official statement, this is a reality where the boys will have to acknowledge their greed as their values will gradually come into conflict with their desires. In the story, this conflict will make them question their identity and their place in this new environment, and the dilemma that arises from this conflict will be eventually shown in the title track. You see, according to the information that we have so far, Tamed and Dashed will explore the confusion that this dilemma actually creates. The choice that the boys will have to make this time is whether to be tamed by their greed and submit to it, or actually dash away from their ambition by running away. This is a story that will explore all the anxiety and confusion that come from being unsure about which values to follow in this new stage of their life. After giving and taking to achieve their dreams and being drunk and dazed by all the changes that they experience, the boys will have to choose whether to be tamed by one side of them or dash away towards the other. Up until now, we still don't know which side they will choose, but as it turns out, there are a lot of clues that might help us understand the direction that the boys will take. If we take a look at the three versions of the album, for instance, the dilemma of the boys is portrayed with a concept that comes straight out of the Odyssey. This is an epic poem divided into 24 books that is attributed to Homer and tells the story of Odysseus, which is a hero from Greek mythology that after fighting in the Trojan War endures a journey that lasts 10 years in order to go back home. In the album, the versions are called SCYLLA, CHARYBDIS and Odysseus, and these names refer to a specific episode that Odysseus recounts in Book 12. In the story, Odysseus just left the island of Circe, underwent a journey in the underworld, and barely survived an encounter with the sirens, when all of a sudden he finds himself in the process of crossing the Strait of Messina. This is a real-life narrow that is located between the island of Sicily and the Italian region of Calabria, but in the story, crossing this passage is next to impossible, because on each side of the strait there are two monsters that kill any sailor that dares to cross it. On the side of Calabria, we find SCYLLA, which is a female monster with 6 heads, 12 feet, and doggets growing out of her loins. On the side of Sicily, instead, we have CHARYBDIS, who is a giant whirlpool that swallows any ship that crosses her way. In the story, the ship cannot cross in the middle because the current of the strait inevitably draws it to one side or the other, so Odysseus initially chooses to cross on the side of SCYLLA. If SCYLLA has 6 heads and can only kill 6 men at a time, CHARYBDIS would swallow the entire ship and kill all men at once, so in the attempt of choosing the lesser of two evils, Odysseus sacrifices 6 members of his crew and goes for the monster instead. In the story, Odysseus' plan works, because even if SCYLLA kills the 6 men, he and the rest of the crew are safe. When they get to the island of Helios and the crew kills the cattle sacred to the god, however, Helios retaliates by pushing their ship on the side of CHARYBDIS, so by the end of the episode, Odysseus is the only survivor and loses all the people that he tried to save to begin with. Now, if back in the intro the boys told us that in order to get to the treasure they will have to choose between the monster and the tornado, the actual story that inspired it reveals that the hero will actually face both, and in the concept photos it's hinted that the boys will have to do the same as well. You see, if we take a look at the way SCYLLA and CHARYBDIS are portrayed in the album, these two creatures seem to represent the two realities that cause the dilemma that the boys are conflicted about. In the SCYLLA version, for instance, the boys are portrayed in a reality of luxury and wealth where they bathe in money and they wear expensive clothing. This is the side of greed and ambition. It's the dream that they always wanted to achieve that has finally come to life, and the world of luxury that artists can experience after gaining their success. As beautiful as this reality might seem, however, the pictures portray this place as a dark environment that is pretty much isolated from the rest of the world. In the photos in front of the window, for instance, the idea is that the boys are trapped in this new reality. The real world is outside, and they are stuck inside of a beautiful prison where they're almost overwhelmed by all the riches that surround them. This is a place where their values are tested, and this inner conflict is actually portrayed in different ways. In Isung and Sungun's cases, for instance, the theme of the photo seems to be the duality at the core of this conflict. We see Isung's face always being split between light and darkness, and Sungun confronting different reflections of himself as a way to show the inner split that is challenging their identity. The greed and ambition that take over them instead is best represented with Jae and Sonu. If Jae baits in a pool full of money, Sonu's attention is all on the coins, so their photos essentially portray them being already tamed by their greed and literally bathing in it. When it comes to Jake and Nikki, on the other hand, the focus is on the chandelier, and this is a very interesting choice because in the past the chandelier was a symbol of the sun. This is a type of sun that only the wealthy can experience, and in many photos its light is actually red. This may be a reference to the boys diving into the red sun at the beginning of Given and Taken, so in a sense the chandelier represents the new sun that will light up their life in this new world. If in the story the boys are vampires that burn under the sun, in reality they're idols that don't really experience much life in the outside world, so in both cases the chandelier can be seen as their new sun, which is as artificial as it is luxurious. In Jungwon's case instead, we see that his pictures take place inside of a cave, and that in the video is holding a burning red rose, both of which are clues that are actually very important to understand the concept as a whole. The burning rose, for instance, is actually a reference to Choose Chosen, which is the very first debut trailer that anticipated ENHYPEN's debut. Back then, the flower symbolized the failure or success that the boys might experience in their journey, but what's interesting about this reference is that in the video, Jake told us that they started this journey not knowing if it would be a blessing or a curse. In a way, SCYLLA is starting to show us that it can be both, because even if at first they were blinded by their desire to transform, now they're at a point where people look at them in veneration, but the boys look at these people with envy. The conflict introduced in SCYLLA is the same conflict that was foreshadowed in Choose Chosen, because even if ENHYPEN succeeded in making their dreams come true, they're also blinded by greed and they're stuck in a prison of wealth that is making them question their values. This is where the darker aspect of the concept comes into play, because the desires that they feel are essentially freeing a side of them that they didn't know before. This is very similar to what happens in the storyline as well, because even if the woman made them immortal, their immortality came with the price of them turning into monsters. In both cases, their dark side comes to the surface as a result of them crossing the border between reality and their dream, and in SCYLLA, this concept is portrayed with them turning into the very monster that they chose. You see, even if in the concept we can say that ENHYPEN are Odysseus facing the choice between SCYLLA and CHARYBDIS, the dilemma of the album is much more introspective than the one that Odysseus had to face, and because of that, the monsters of ENHYPEN's story become more metaphorical as well. Now, the first clue that might confirm this to be true is actually Jungwon's photo, because in the Odyssey, SCYLLA actually lives inside of a cave. When the ship is approaching the side of SCYLLA, Odysseus and his crew initially don't see the monster because she's hiding in the cave. As they pass right in front of it, however, SCYLLA comes out and snatches the 6 men out of the blue, so this reference might imply that much like SCYLLA, the monstrous side that the boys have inside of them is suddenly coming out as they enter this new world. The real indication that in this context the boys might be the monster, however, can actually be found in this picture right here, because in the back there is a painting called Cersei Punishes Glaucus by turning SCYLLA into a monster. Now, this painting is actually about SCYLLA's origin story as it's told in Ovid's Metamorphosis, because in that version of the tale, SCYLLA was actually born as a nymph. In the story, Glaucus is a sea god that falls in love with the girl, but when she rejects him, he goes to Cersei for help. Now, Cersei here is an enchantress that appears in the Odyssey as well, and in this tale, Glaucus begs her to prepare a potion to make SCYLLA fall in love with him. Since Cersei wants Glaucus for herself and he rejects her, however, the enchantress punishes the god by transforming SCYLLA into the very monster that kills Odysseus' man. If you look closely, however, in the picture, the boys are positioned in a way that it almost makes it seem like they are the victims of the punishment, because the only part of the painting that we can see is actually Cersei waving the torch. In this photo, SCYLLA is replaced by ENHYPEN, and this makes sense because much like SCYLLA, ENHYPEN undergo a transformation at the hands of an enchantress that turns them into monsters. Much like the woman in white, Cersei is a figure that in the Odyssey is both a source of danger and aid, because even if in the story she helps Odysseus get what he wants, she also transforms his men into pigs. If in the painting Cersei has a torch, moreover, in Drunken Days the woman gives ENHYPEN the flames of a torch, so in both cases the heroes interact with an enchantress that has the potential to help them and to curse them. As I mentioned earlier, ENHYPEN's transformation can be seen both as a blessing and as a curse, so comparing the woman to Cersei is very fitting in this case, because even if she gives them everything they ever wanted, their wishes come true at the highest of prices. Now, SCYLLA represents the side of greed that challenges the boys' values and makes them question their beliefs. In CHARYBDIS, we actually see what values the boys are leaving behind. After SCYLLA showed us the side of the idols living their dream and the monster coming to the surface, CHARYBDIS focuses on the side of the boy and the human. This is a side that ENHYPEN kinda left behind the moment they crossed the border, but in this concept we see that this side of them is still pretty much present. Now, if we compare CHARYBDIS to SCYLLA, the first thing that comes to mind is how normal these photos actually look, because each of the boys are in their own room and doing their own thing. Nikki's pictures, for instance, are focused on painting, Jake is reading, and Jungwon is writing. Sangwon, on the other hand, is surrounded by gym equipment, Hee-sung is surrounded by albums and instruments, Sonu is drawing on the wall, and Jae is doing chores. These are all normal activities that normal boys usually do in their free time, and the normality of it all is further shown in the rest of the concept, where we see the boys having fun together in the outside world. This is a far cry in comparison to the people that we saw in SCYLLA, but even if this is their more authentic side, it's also the side of them that they cannot really indulge in anymore. After crossing the border and starting their journey together, the boys don't have much time to be kids and do what they want, because the other side of them is slowly taking over. As we see with the letters, however, this is not all bad, of course, because ENHYPEN got engines, and their dreams and ambitions are also a part of them that pushes them to improve and become better performers in the future. When their greed is mentioned in the letters, it's mentioned in a positive light, because this greed is their greed to improve themselves. They want to be better, they want to improve their skills, and they want to show engines all the talents that they have. These are all very normal wishes to have for people in their situation, and it's also very human of them to talk about their worries, their frustration about COVID, and their desire to finally meet their fans. You see, if you look at the letter in this context, what transpires is essentially the boy hidden behind the idol. The people who wrote these letters are boys with big dreams who want to do their best, but also enjoy their youth in the process. As I mentioned earlier, however, these desires are in conflict with the side of the monster, and if they're not careful, this part of them might be swallowed up and disappear like the ships destroyed by CHARYBDIS. If you look closely, even if this concept is brighter and more positive, the traces of the other side still linger in the background. In Sonu's pictures, for instance, we see a necklace with the emblem of a monster. Nikki is wearing a chain that looks like the chain that trapped her heart in fever, and Hee-sung is portrayed next to an album called Delilah. This is a song by Tom Jones about a woman that, much like Cersei and the woman in white, deceives the man and traps him in a love that he cannot escape, so even in their normality, the shadow of the other side still threatens to swallow them. SCYLLA is the monster of greed that is created when their dreams come to life, and CHARYBDIS is the monster that wants to swallow their normality in their journey to success. In the middle of it all, ENHYPEN played the role of Odysseus, and this leads us to the final concept as well as the teasers of the title track. Now, in and of himself, Odysseus is actually the perfect character to embody the conflict that the boys are facing, because in the Odyssey, this hero is a walking contradiction. In the story, Odysseus is a king, but when he finally goes home, he presents himself as a beggar. He's a hero known by all, but when he faces the Cyclops, he introduces himself as nobody. He can be vicious but also compassionate, and he is a leader but also a friend, so first and foremost, Odysseus is a character that embodies humanity in all its forms. You see, even if the Odyssey is often described as the epic story of a hero's journey, in reality it's just the story of a man who wants to go home. It's the story of a person that makes many mistakes, is tempted by many desires, and has many flaws that cloud his judgment, but it's also the story of a man who is willing to learn from it all and never loses sight of what's truly important. Much like him, ENHYPEN have a duality in themselves, because if in reality they are idols and boys, in the story they are vampires and humans. They exist in two realities in conflict with each other, but that also inevitably overlap, and at the end of the day, what makes them go on is none other than the friendship that they share with each other. Now, in both Odysseus and the teasers, this idea is conveyed with a concept that revolves around rugby, which, interestingly enough, is a game that relies on teamwork, but it's also heavily based on conflict. Much like the two sides of a dilemma, in rugby the two teams clash with each other. They fight for the ball and both sides want to win the game, but this conflict is eventually resolved when the teams work together and one side eventually triumphs over the other. This means that in order to overcome their dilemma, the boys will likely have to work together to remind each other that their unity is what matters the most no matter what side they're actually facing. As we see in the teasers, this is a concept that will be important in the story as well, because if you look closely, the first teaser shows that the video will be once again split between two different timelines. Even if the boys are playing in both, one scene is set in the present while the other is set in the past, so this could possibly imply that this dilemma will show up in different ways according to the situation. Another detail that is important to point out, moreover, is that in the present timeline, the videos heavily focus on this emblem right here. This is the symbol of the ODYSSEUS Academy, which is the school that the boys attend in the fictional universe of the story. Back in drunken days, the same symbol was on the members' uniforms, but not on the uniforms worn by Kay and EJ, so in the future it's possible that the conflict at the core of this comeback will expand in a school rivalry as well. To know how things will play out, however, we'll have to wait and see. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!